What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Mooseman Outdoors Podcast. We have a special guest here, Mike Santos with Champlain Provisions, a good buddy of mine when I moved up here to Vermont. Mike, how's everything going, dude?
Oh, everything's fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super geeked about doing this. I'm loving the fact that you're getting the podcast up and running. There's been some really cool and fun topics. So excited to chat about, fishing lures today.
Yeah, man. I want to hear a little bit about what Champlain Provisions is and where it started and get the background on it, man.
Yeah, so Champlain Provisions. Wow, that's kind of a good question. Its origin story. It's still pretty loose what Champlain Provisions is, and still something that to this day I'm still kind of wrestling with.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that it started off was that I just kind of wanted to have something that I owned and made my own. So I always say that if I have two neurons that are rubbing together up there, they're probably thinking about fishing. And so I wanted to figure out a way that I could take that passion and just kind of make something my own. And I started watching YouTube videos it started off with soft plastics. And so I started to go that route, and I started to make some soft plastics, some Senkos and stuff like that. And then that quickly led to going down further the rabbit hole, and the hyperfixation tends to start, and that's typically what I do. I just start watching YouTube videos, and it just
takes off from there, man.
It really does. It's like, oh, I could do that. I usually can't at first, but it kind of gets there. I definitely don't. I like to say that I don't have an artistic bone in my body. Some people are very nice, and they say nice things about some of the lures that I paint. But yeah, so it started off kind of when I moved out here.
Because you're originally from...
I'm originally from Miami, Florida.
So huge fishing culture out there.
Yeah, so I grew up fishing in a lot of the urban canals. I would go out and fish all the time. That's a cool thing about Miami, is that the weather obviously is great. And I was just chasing peacock bass, or I was fishing with bread for tilapia or Oscars, or all sorts of crazy cichlids and stuff like that. Peacock bass, largemouth and stuff like that. So yeah, it was either go home and do my homework and go and fish. And I think
it's a pretty easy choice.
I think you can imagine which one I ended up deciding on. Yeah, so I grew up in Miami. I traveled quite a bit. I lived in a bunch of places. I ended up living in Colorado for the longest time. So out there, I was fishing a lot of stock trout for the most part.
Yep.
Yeah,
a lot of rivers, a lot of...
Yeah, there was a lot of that. There was a place I was right by. I lived in Centennial, which is right outside of Denver.
Okay.
So they have a really good trout stocking program, and so I kind of stopped fishing for a long time, and then I got back into it, and it was stock trout that brought me back. That's why I have one tattooed on my arm there. I love stock trout, but that's a whole other story. I could probably talk for 40 minutes about just that. But yeah, so I ended up moving from Colorado out here to Vermont, and this is kind of where I started to...
Make baits, right?
Yeah, to make baits. I met some really cool people. Shout out Lucas Value, a guy named Matt Gilbert, and we talking about fishing every day. It started to get to the point where I was like, there really isn't a super strong fishing bait making culture, at least that I knew of anyway. I knew there were some guys like Will Nolan, who was airbrushing, the guys over at Crazy Ivan. I think River Rat was still doing that. So
Yep.
I just kind of jumped headfirst into it.
That's awesome. I mean, the assortment is unreal. I mean, you went going from plastics. I mean, you're making striper bait now, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then you're going from making, replica rats to swim baits to glide baits. I mean, is there anything that you feel as though is your go-to every time that you hit this lake? I mean, Champlain, is like a treasure in this country.
It's amazing. It's such a cool fishery. When I moved to Champlain, and I get really excited when I talk about it. It's such a diverse fishery.
Yeah.
In Colorado, it was a paradise to go fish if you're into trout. There's gold medal water out there, but what I really wanted to have is a nice, diverse fishery, and that's what I think Champlain does best. So you can go out there and catch world-class smallies. You can go catch lake trout. I've fallen in love with the lake trout fishery and what that is. You can troll for landlocked salmon. You can also go catch buckets of perch. There's a little bit in there for everyone. So I think that's probably one of the coolest qualities that Champlain has, is how diverse and rich of a fishery it is.
And that was something that made you fall in love with it, was that lake trout. Because, when I met you, I personally never went out and jigged lake trout before, but when I came up here and you were like, hey, man, let's go for Lakers, I said, what do we got to do? You said jigging. I grew up saltwater fishing out in New England, so it's just I get it, the jigging part of it. But I was not expecting this whole thermocline, and these Lakers are so pushed to the bottom, and it was
Yeah.
It was like, as soon as they saw these things, it was bang every time. And you got them by the lip, and they're doing everything they can to get off of it.
Yeah.
Until you see bubbles, and they're up at the surface. And you know, that's all she wrote at that point.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, I started off... my origin story with lake trout was that I was out fishing for perch on Memphis Magog with Lucas, and we were out there, and the first one I was fishing for perch with tiny little pinhead minnows, and I had like a 4mm tungsten jig, and I got a big old tug, and it turns out that it was a 28-inch lake trout,
and that was
awesome, and that's all she wrote. After that, like, that's going back to that hyperfixation. That's all I wanted to do was like digest content about lake trout and figure out this fish that, like, at that point had a complete stronghold on my fishing brain.
And then after that, you kind of started falling in and expanding to the bass scene, which is a whole different animal. I mean, between the culture, the fish itself, you know, everything that comes along with fishing for those fish. I mean... Yeah,
lake trout were great, and I started to get into them, and I think at this point, I mean, that was another thing. Lucas and I went out, and we just really had to start from scratch on it. And luckily, the Champlain lake trout are pretty forgiving as far as dudes figuring it out and their system and everything like that. But now I'm starting to dive into more of the bass, because I feel like I'm at a good point with the Lakers. And let me tell you, going from Lakers to bass has been one of the most humbling experiences that I've ever had. I don't want to say that any sort of fish is easy to catch, but I think that by comparison, when you look at a lake trout versus a bass, I'm getting handed my hat a lot on Champlain, but that's okay. That's okay.
It's all trial and error, man. It's all trial and error out there with these things.
Yeah, but there's no real lure that I go to. I still struggle a lot. Like, obviously, just like I think just about anybody, my love is in the topwater game.
Oh, of course. I mean, seeing that pop right at the top.
I know. There's such few things that, like, that jarring feeling, that smash on top. So the rat that you have over there is a fun one. So that one's kind of modeled after the Spro BBZ 30 millimeter. Yeah, and so I did a show this December, and people were very intrigued by that lure, and luckily I had the foresight to videotape a swim test of it and show them what it looked like in the water.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and they were like, a rat? That's so weird. But like just the way that it looks in the water, and it has a nice knock on it, there's a nice pretty big rattle in there. Mm-hmm. It's really cool, and it's really fun, and I'm super excited to get out there and throw it a little bit more in those.
Oh, in the springtime, I can't wait myself, man. I cannot wait myself.
Yeah, I think that, and people look at it and they're like, that's super weird. And I was like, do you throw topwater baits? And they're like, of course I do. And I'm like, no different. It's a wake bait, so it's something that a lot of my bait making has really introduced me to a lot of different style of lures that I've never really encountered before, like that spy bait.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if you've fished spy baits much. This one right here. But this is one, a local angler, Will Dowd Martin out of Essex Junction. He showed me this. And so this is based on a Duo Realis 90 millimeter lure. And I've been painting up this pattern quite a bit. It kind of has that color, that shad color shift.
Okay.
But it's kind of, it's an interesting bait in that it's kind of like a lipless. It's weighted. Yep. It's a finesse technique that comes from Japan, and so they fish really high pressured water over there.
Yep.
So it's, even though they have these big propellers on the front and back, you're supposed to fish this bait as slow as possible.
Just let the vibrations giving off that feel for the fish to find it. Yep.
I mean, I just want to rip this thing through the water. So. This is kind of like the hard lure version of just a wacky Senko.
Everything from a white perch will hit that, and pike will hit that. I mean, that's the beauty of like this lake. And like you're targeting bass mid cast, and you're going for those guys, and the next thing you know, you get some surprise like that. And that's the beautiful thing about these mid-size, these baits that provide such diversity when you're casting out here, and all these coves, or if you go deep water and you're jigging, or if you're just throwing swim baits out deep. Is there a certain style that you typically favor more lately? Whether it be drop shot or plastic worm, Ned rig.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, with what you're going for, you're going to switch it up. But what's your preference as far as you getting on the boat?
Man, so I can't stress enough how I am still figuring out this bass game. I will tell you, I could probably answer the question a little bit better, like which ones I definitely avoid and I struggle with. And I'll get to, I guess, the ones that I really prefer. But I struggle with a lot of, like, the bottom baits.
Okay.
You know, I love a tube on Champlain, but man, it is frustrating. I'm getting hung up a lot. And I know there's a couple rigging techniques that you can use to kind of go weedless on a tube. Mm-hmm. Ned rigs are another one.
One of my favorites right there, yeah.
I know. It's
always a go-to.
Neds are polarizing. Like, a lot of people... I know that it is a fish catcher, but to just throw a bait out there and to let it sit and just let it work on its own is a lesson in futility for me. And I'm not a super patient angler, so I struggle a bit with that. But I do love a good crankbait bite. I obviously, there's a lot of topwater in here. I like lipless cranks. I use them. That's one of my absolute favorite ways to catch lake trout.
Yep.
Is with lipless through the ice. Not that we have much of an ice season this year.
Yeah, unfortunately,
the past couple years, but yeah. There's some fun ones in there.
Oh man, wait till you go for striper out in the canal. You were mentioning that earlier, man. I mean,
yeah.
There's something about throwing something like this size out, and it's heavy, and it's go, and then you just instantly feel. Because you've caught striper before? Or?
I've not. No, this is gonna be my first striped bass.
Wow. Yeah, this is honestly, like, to me, what really started on my fixation on saltwater fish was just that instant pull. You know, you're throwing out these 4-6 ounce, lures out in the canal, and you're either finessing them, playing the top, playing the midsection, and then you just get this behemoth cow.
Yeah.
And it's just instant pull. You set it and you just let it dance. And I feel like with your baits, because you've painted me some mackerel and stuff in the past.
Yeah,
and I've taken
them in there.
Yeah, and I've taken them out to, and I've taken them out. Right, yep, I've taken them out to the canal. I've taken them off the beach, and schoolies will go after them, which is amazing. I go to Newburyport a lot, which is like when the striped schoolies come up, I'll have to bring you there, Newburyport, and I usually go to like Cashman's Park, and it's like a little pier, but it's just like me and my buddy Danny, Shadow Danny, like 70 fish in a day. Like, it does, even if they're like 3, 4, 5 pounders. But like, if you want to go out and test your baits, it's something about sunset and just throwing out for schoolies. And when they're coming in at 150 a piece, racing through, oh my god, the adrenaline's there.
Man, so I am, I was telling you earlier that I'm going to do my first trip out to Cape Cod, and I want to fish the canal a little bit, which, as just a fishery, is such an amazing, like, I've been going down a ton of rabbit holes about canal fishery and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. From everything that I've seen, I'm pretty sure 30% of that sea bottom is just jigs that have been hung up down there.
Most of it is artificial at this point.
Yeah. But it's really cool. I just painted up some giant spooks, so I have like a 9-inch 3-ounce spook.
Oh boy.
Yeah, which, I mean, I guess is a big lure that's been really popular. I want to say it's like a dock something or other.
Yep.
Yep. But it's a bummer. I painted that lure and it definitely left me wanting more. Because I guess there's a saying out there that's like, if it's not bone, leave it at home.
Yep.
Which is fine. I guess I struggle with that a little bit in like bait making and painting. Is a lot of like proven colors and stuff like that. I just don't enjoy painting. Like just spray painting an entire giant spook, which is such a large canvas, just bone white. I was just like,
yeah, I know.
Snooze fest. But you can't argue
because it's gonna catch you something.
You can't argue with, or maybe you can argue. I guess I do quite a bit in my bait making. I definitely prefer like much brighter colors, and some guys are like, "Oh, that's really bright," and I'm like, "What's the difference between that and Fire Tiger or Rapala?" Yep. But yeah, so I think that as far as the ones that I go to, I really like the top water. I like an active bait. I've been wanting to get into some bigger baits as well. Yep. Because I haven't been frustrated enough as it is, so I want to catch even less fish. So I want to throw some big glides and everything like that, like the peacock bass over there.
What about like different styles of? I mean, have you ever gotten into like fly fishing or anything like that?
I have. I did fly fish a bit. It didn't super ring my bell a lot. Yeah.
It definitely is one of those like, it's like an antique to me. Like you got to be very like. You got to finesse the whole thing. And a lot of us are just like, go rip that thing out there, play the bottom, rip it in, and then go. But, I mean, I only took up fly fishing in the last handful of years. My buddy showed me back home, and he said, we're going to go to Salmon River, and this is what we're going to do. and I'm like, this is what we're gonna use. Like, there's no bottom. Like, how am I gonna, And then you're using something that's minute size wise compared to this. I mean, I would want to do Colorado at one point.
You would?
I would totally fly fish Colorado. Yeah. That would be so cool.
Yeah, I mean, to see like a gorgeous big buck rainbow or brown come up and take a dry fly
is something. Like, it's like a popper. It's chef's kiss. It is chef's kiss. Yeah. It's like an eruption.
For me, if you value a diverse fishery, I much prefer what I have here in Champlain.
Oh, of course. I mean, I forgot who said it. I watched it on a video like a while ago before I moved up here, and just the sheer fact that someone was like, if you want to go catch a drum, go catch a drum, and then if you're done and they're not biting, turn around and catch a smallmouth. Like, that says so much when it's like you don't gotta move to catch 3-4 different kinds of fish. There's like over 80 kinds of fish in this lake.
Yeah.
And I always encourage people, like, if they're gonna come and try to go on a fishing vacation or some sort of excursion, early spring, mid fall, like this is the cream.
Yeah, I mean, there's you talked about drum. I have not caught a sheep's head out here.
Same.
I want to.
It's on the list.
There's been a couple captains. Shout out Captain Thorny and Captain Matt Trombley. Those guys have talked to me about some sheep's head, and hopefully I'll be able to get some good info out of them because I have painted up a couple blade baits, which I guess is kind of a preferred.
I've never fished a blade bait. I actually was just telling my buddy Tyler earlier this morning that like, that's something that I gotta get used to because I mean, besides a cast master, I mean that was always my go-to in Massachusetts. Whether it was a pickerel, a pike, a bass, whatever, they're gonna go after that, and that was to me. I mean, I wouldn't even consider that a real blade bait because the blade baits up here, two trebles and look like a fish.
Yeah, so it's definitely different. So my buddy Will talked me through right over by the area in the causeway, right during the fall and the spring are just awesome times to throw that blade bait, and those smallmouth are just pointed right down on the bottom.
So are you mainly jigging them or playing them as a retrieve?
So it's a tiny little rip up, and that's once again you look at that bait and all you want to do is rip it up and feel that vibration.
Yep.
It's not true. You just want to raise it up and then drop it back down. Raise it up and drop it back down, and so it flutters for a second and then it goes down. And they'll usually. It depends on how they take it. On the rip up, you'll find that they're
boom. They'll come up and chase it.
And sometimes you'll get them right underneath the jaw.
Yep, like they were thinking about going after it.
They're right there eating it. Yep.
Yep.
But it's such a cool. Like another thing that I love about Champlain is that it's available for everyone. So there are so many fisheries that I think. Either inherently or people make it that way that are gate kept a little bit, and so in Colorado, like if you're not walking out and like dripping in super expensive gear with the most expensive fly rod, you kind of get to look that side eye, and that's one of the things that
I only fish G Loomis and 24 karat gold.
So there's a little bit of that, but so I mean, just one of my logos is a bobber, and as much as I love painting all of these things. I still go. I have 2 girls, and I still take them out. I still soak worms under bobbers, and man, when at 43 years old, looking at that bobber go down still makes my heart race, and I never want to lose that. So I think that's really cool that there's so many like bank fishing opportunities on Champlain. I mean, people in the Missisquoi are crushing muskie.
Right off. Yep.
There's people catching sheep's head. Alex went out. He has a really cool video where he's just soaking crawdads on the bottom from shore. So I think that's a really cool thing that Champlain and just a lot of the fisheries out here in Vermont do. I mean, you can still get out there. And it's available for everyone to get out there.
So let's talk a little bit about the logos. I mean, so you got the bobber, which is obviously the foundation of fishing. That's like the Mount Rushmore lure. At that point, it really is. It's just like nightcrawler, bobber, like
the bobber has a huge place in my heart because I mean I love it. I think it's a callback to like all of us. I think so many people started off soaking that worm under a bobber, and I think that there's people that move on from a worm and a bobber and they look down on people that still soak meat under a bobber. And I have a big problem with that. I see that a bit with like the bass guys. And I also see it like with some fly fishing guys. They're like,
let's move away from
how dare you?
Like we forgot where we came from. We're beyond that now.
I love to fish. All
any kind. Any cane pole, string on a. I mean, I've seen people get a Bud Light can with some string on that bad Larry and throw it out, and that was it, man. that was fishing.
It still is.
It still
is for a lot of people. So yeah, so for me, that bobber means a lot. It still holds a very, very big place in my heart. The popper kind of just it's a classic color combo. I don't paint too many. Some people are always like, do you have any lures that are painted like that, red and white? And I was like, I have a couple, but I very rarely go with that color combo. For some reason or another, I always think of like saltwater lures.
I was going to say, believe it or not, like when I started off saltwater fishing, and they got those cheap Walmart, 6-inch poppers, they were white, either with a blue head or a red head.
Head and poppers.
And it's just so funny that they just work.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen people videos of like, I'm just going to get this piece of block of wood, throw it, an eye loop, bolt in there, and then put a treble and watch this catch me a fish. And it does. And it's so crazy to me because it's just like, that worked. Like, how?
Matt, we don't have enough time. We could probably do another 4-hour podcast on my terrible takes on fishing and color theory and what that is. I have a lot of takes on that, but I'll just give you one that I think that we as fishermen overvalue colors and patterns that we put on there. I think if I were to rank that on like my top 5 most important things when it comes to catching fish, I think it may be number 4 or 5.
Yeah.
I think people really get hung up on color, and
there's a science to it.
There is, yeah. And I think when I paint, and I'm very honest, and this is terrible, I paint more for fishermen than I do necessarily for fish. And
which is great.
So that's a take that not a lot of people who paint lures will say out loud. But I feel strongly that I don't know what fish want to see. And I don't think science has really drilled down
to the point where,
yeah.
What will you have today?
So for me, I want to paint something. I mean, there are some proven patterns, and there's some stuff that I generally stick to. Darker on the top, lighter on the bottom to mimic that bait fish. But I think that I think action is more important.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
I would say being around fish is a lot more important. But for me, I want the person who buys one of my lures to feel confident about it. So I want to visually appeal to that angler so that lure spends as much time as possible on that line, which I think is going to inherently be more productive or not. But you're not going to see anything very realistic on this table.
No, but like I said, it plays a big part. I mean, a lot of it, like you said, drills down to the action of the lure and your choices in what you pick to paint.
Yeah.
They hit the spot. Yeah. Whether it be something that you're jigging, whether it be something that you're retrieving, whether it be something that you're finessing, it all hits the exact places that you need to hit to catch a fish. Since I've met you, I've used, I caught my first walleyes on one of your Ned rigs. I've caught plenty of pike on your lipless going up and down the Winooski River. Like,
that's something you don't hear often. Walleye on the Ned rig.
Walleye on the Ned rig. That blew my mind. I mean, I was in the Missisquoi. There were a bunch of Canadian people there. There were a bunch of locals there. You see every sort of setup, whether it be the boat, the fancy boat, the guy on a pontoon that barely floats, held up by duct tape.
Yeah.
And then you got people who are like using live bait. But I saw a lot of like bottom bouncers.
Yeah. A
lot of people like just trolling setups, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna go back to my roots. I'm gonna throw this out because I don't see anybody else using this.
Yeah. And
I just played the bottom, and it was that neon green, that like ecto green color, that really sold it. And I was just like, I think I got something. And then as soon as it tugged and it went away from me, and I brought it up, I was just like, holy crap! Like this thing actually swallowed this whole Ned rig, and I couldn't think, And then obviously I started sticking with that.
Yeah.
So that ended up working out, and I mean, like, that's some of the core stuff that you're gonna go back to is just like, all right, like the action of the lure. And how you had it painted, how vibrant it was, I feel like played a big part in that muddy water. I usually use dark, but that neon must have like sparked something in that walleye.
Yeah, I always try and challenge like norms when it comes to painting. Like so when we were talking about if it's not bone, leave it at home. Like I hate that I buckled and I painted that giant thing bone white, but I just don't know enough about that fishery to say, no, that's not the case. Or I want to do something differently. Like, people will look at, I tend to paint a lot of peacock bass, like that Clyde bait over there.
Yep.
And so we were like, what are you doing? There's no peacock bass in Champlain. I'm like, well, number one, I just paint what's in my heart. I love peacock bass going back to my time in Miami. But I don't think that, honestly, a bass looks at that and sees a peacock bass or a perch. I mean, it sees bars, it sees a profile, a general color, so to speak. But
something that's going to rattle its cage and make it want to go.
Yeah, these days man, it's not a wise business practice, I guess. But
it's not all about the business, though. I mean, this whole thing's about the passion. At the end of the day, I mean, like you said, seeing that bobber go into the water tickles your fancy, and that's something that you can't get away of, because at the end of the day, it's like, you know, it's like for a hunter hearing that rustling of that leaf, you're gonna look around real quick and go, oh man, like that just got me going. Like now the anxiety's there. It's like people that bass fish and they see something on their live scope, they're gonna be like, oh, I gotta dump, you know, I gotta jig right over here, you know, and that's something that goes back, and then just it stays true to us as fishermen, as hunters, as any of these things, you know what I mean? And you as a bait maker, you know, this is something that I was like, wow, like, you don't see these on the shelf. Yeah. You don't walk down the aisle and see these on the shelf.
You don't see demon craws on the shelf?
No, that's not like that, man. I mean, dude.
But yeah, so it's funny you mentioned the business aspect of this, because I'm probably the least concerned about if not, I actively sabotage myself quite a bit with this. Just the other day, somebody asked me to paint something, and I said no, which is kind of silly for a lot of people. But for me, what I found is that when I paint somebody else's vision on something, like, it just doesn't really manifest in a really cool way for me. It doesn't ring my bell.
It doesn't say Champlain Provisions.
It doesn't. And so for me, thankfully, I've never looked at it as a business so much. I probably should look at it a little bit more. But I paint what I want, and I'd probably be painting a lot less peacock bass if I was painting what people wanted.
What aspirations do you have for CP, for Champlain Provisions? Is there something that you're aiming towards the future that you want the people to know, that like what's held in store for 2024? Is there anything exciting? Is there? I mean, are you going to shows? I saw you at the local show not long ago.
Yeah. So I am going to be at a couple shows. I hadn't planned on it, but Jamie Chacon, shout out Jamie, is doing the Fisherman's Flea Market for the vets.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, at the VFW, and that is, I want to say, April 6th. And you can find that on Facebook. Take a look there.
Yep.
So he's going to be at that show. I'm going to have some lures. There are going to be some awesome bait makers there. Matt Moore of M&M Baits out of Rutland.
Okay.
Pete Stoneman and Sons out of Castleton is going to be there.
That's
Pete Stoneman is awesome. He gets after it. He's a fantastic bait maker. Go to him for all of your custom work. You will not be disappointed. And yeah, so I'm going to do that show, and I'm really excited about that. I'm working on some soft plastics. I'm toying with the idea of having kind of a plastics bar where you can go in and we'll sell plastics by the ounce, so that you can mix and match colors like High-Tex and stuff like that.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe that's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be realized, but there's another holiday show that I do. But this year, I want to fish more. Honestly, I felt like last year was really challenging weather-wise. When it wasn't blowing, it was raining. So I have that upcoming trip to Cape Cod in May, St. Lawrence Smallmouth in June. July, there's conversations of Messina Muskie canoe trip. To go up to Messina, New York. Yeah, there was a cool guy that I met at one of the shows, Don Meisner, who I guess did a show back in the day on PBS. He still does it, maybe.
All right, Mike. So what's going on as far as this upcoming year? Like, are you guys doing anything special as far as for Champlain Provisions goes?
As far as Champlain Provisions goes, outside of just fishing a lot more, which I've talked about and I can't say enough, that's my big mantra going into this, is, I have some shows coming up. We have the VFW show that's being put on by Jamie Chacon in Essex Junction. Then I will probably do another holiday market, a lot of fishing during the summer, and then I'm going to possibly start to dabble into painting and making some resin baits, which is something that I haven't done. Stay tuned. Probably making a lot more poor business choices. That
we call them wise investments. Wise investments.
That's what I tell my wife. Yeah.
That's great. But I mean, hey, it's been a decent 2 months. Well, technically, we're in the third month now of the year. I mean, obviously, you aspire to go fishing more, get more material out there as far as, like, putting your baits on the rod and getting it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a successful math equation that's waiting to happen, which is great.
Yeah, unless you talk to my accountant, in which case the math ain't mathin' on this one. But that's okay. Yeah, I'm passionate about it, and I love the product that I'm putting out there. Hopefully other people kind of see that passion and they like it as well. But at the end of the day, I think that, I'm pretty proud of where Champlain Provisions is.
That's
and where
amazing.
it's going.
Do you have any inspiring words for our viewers here?
Inspiring words. No, I would just say get out and fish as much as possible. I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but if you're anything like me that likes to just like hyperfixate on fishing and like to think through it, I can't tell you how many hours of YouTube videos I have watched that I've learned way more in just being out there with a rod and reel in my hand in 5 minutes.
And that's what got us to where we're at today.
Yeah, and I've spent a lot of hours getting skunked on the water.
I mean, hey, I
still do.
It's still better than a good day at work. I mean, the old saying is still true to this day.
Yeah,
so.
But it's good. I'm learning about this fishery, and like that's one of the cool things is that it's constantly humbling me as well as teaching me a lot. So, Champlain. Wow,
what a wonderful place.
It's a tough one to crack, but I think that once you kind of get in there, it's going to be really rewarding.
Mike, I really appreciate the time you took to come here and show everybody your business and what your dreams and aspirations are with Champlain Provisions and what it's done for me as a fisherman that uses your baits. And I mean, I can't wait for springtime and throw these things out on the water, man. I am so amped for that. I'm sure you are too. Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm passionate about this, and I love getting to chat with another passionate angler, and I love what you're doing with Mooseman Outdoors. Thank you so much, man. I think it means the world. Cool. Yeah, I think it's been really cool the last couple episodes. I'm excited to hear the Salmon River and some of the Boston fishing and maybe even a striper episode. We'll be definitely in the works with that stuff. I mean, as soon as it's go time, it's go time. I need some Cape Cod tips for the upcoming trip. Hopefully get on my first striped bass. I got you, man. I got all. Where are the bluefish? I heard they're awesome. Oh my god, those gators in the water, man. Gators in the water. They're like donkeys though, but they are. I'm excited. Oh, I can't wait. I mean, the salt water is gonna run through you. The New England salt water. There's something about it, man. It's cool. And how cool is it that I'm 3.5 hour trip away from, fishing a world-class fishery like, Cape Cod. Yeah. And surf casting. I want to get you out for haddock one day. Yeah. It's a hell of an experience. I got a good buddy of mine, Al Goran's Charters out of Hampton Beach. I mean, their setup is amazing, and they everything to put in the hook on the line for you if need be. Yeah. But they'll get you fish. They'll bring you out there. It's a hell of a time. Nice. I mean, it's going to be an amazing summer, and I can't wait to share that with everybody and share that with you, buddy. Awesome. Thank you so much, man. Of course, man. Thank you so much. All right, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this episode. Please like and subscribe for more adventures. I have a lot of good things coming out in the water as soon as it thaws out with what little ice we have left. And I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.